Her first emotion of the realm of reality was a sense of power. She sat up with a flowing, leisurely movement of confidence, feeling the flow of the motion from muscle to muscle through her body. She asked, and it was the slowness, the sound of casual curiosity, the tone of taking the implications for granted, that gave to her voice the faintest sound of disdain. "How did you know what I look like in my office?" "I told you that I've watched you for years." "How were you able to watch me that thoroughly? From where?" "I will not answer you now," he said, simply, without defiance. The slight movement of her shoulder leaning back, the pause, then the lower, huskier tone of her voice left a hint of smiling triumph to trail behind her words. "When did you see me for the first time?" 10 years ago, he answered, looking straight at her, letting her see that he was answering the full, unnamed meaning of her question. "Where?" The word was almost a command. He hesitated. Then she saw a faint smile that touched only his lips, not his eyes, the kind of smile with which one contemplates, with longing, bitterness, and pride, a possession purchased at an excruciating cost. His eyes seemed directed not at her, but at the girl of that time. "Underground, in the Taggart terminal," he answered. She became suddenly conscious of her posture. She had let her shoulder blades slide down against the chair, carelessly, half lying, one leg stretched forward, and with her sternly tailored, transparent blouse, her wide peasant skirt hand-printed in violent colors, her thin stocking and high-heeled pump, she did not look like a railroad executive. The consciousness of it struck her in answer to his eyes that seemed to be seeing the unattainable. She looked like that which she was, his servant girl. She knew the moment when some faintest stress of the brilliance in his dark green eyes removed the veil of distance, replacing the vision of the past by the act of seeing her immediate person. She met his eyes with that insolent glance which is a smile, without movement of facial muscles. He turned away, but as he moved across the room, his steps were as eloquent as the sound of a voice. She knew that he wanted to leave the room as he always left it. He had never stayed for longer than a brief good night when he came home. She watched the course of his struggle, whether by means of his steps, begun in one direction and swerving in another, or by means of her certainty that her body had become an instrument for the direct perception of his, like a screen, reflecting both movements and motives. She could not tell. She knew only that he, who had never started or lost a battle against himself, now had no power to leave this room. His manner seemed to show no sign of strain. He took off his coat, throwing it aside, remaining in shirt-sleeves, and sat down facing her at the window across the room. But he sat down on the arm of a chair, as if he were neither leaving nor staying. She felt the light-headed, the easy, the almost frivolous sensation of triumph in the knowledge that she was holding him as surely as by a physical touch. For the length of a moment, brief and dangerous to endure, it was a more satisfying form of contact. Then she felt a sudden blinding shock, which was half blow, half scream within her, and she groped, stunned for its cause, only to realize that he had leaned a little to one side, and it had been no more than the sight of an accidental posture, of the long line running from his shoulder to the angle of his waist, to his hips, down his legs. She looked away, not to let him see that she was trembling, and she dropped all thoughts of triumph, and of whose was the power. "I've seen you many times since," he said quietly, steadily, but a little more slowly than usual, as if he could control everything except his need to speak. "Where have you seen me?" "Many places." "But you made certain to remain unseen?" She knew that his was a face she could not have failed to notice. "Yes." "Why? Were you afraid?" "Yes." He said it simply, and it took her a moment to realize that he was admitting he knew what the sight of his person would have meant to her. "Did you know who I was when you saw me for the first time?" "Oh, yes. My worst enemy but one." "What?" She had not expected it. She added more quietly, "Who's the worst one?" "Dr. Robert Stadler." "Did you have me classified with him?" "No, he's my conscious enemy. He's the man who sold his soul. We don't intend to reclaim him. You were one of us." I knew it long before I saw you. I knew also that you would be the last to join us, and the hardest one to defeat. Who told you that? Francisco. She let a moment pass, then asked, What did he say? He said that of all the names on our list, you'd be the one most difficult to win. That was when I heard of you for the first time. It was Francisco who put your name on our list. He told me that you were the sole hope and future of Taggart Transcontinental, that you'd stand against us for a long time, that you'd fight a desperate battle for your railroad, because you had too much endurance, courage, and consecration to your work. He glanced at her. He told me nothing else. He spoke of you as if he were merely discussing one of our future strikers. I knew that you and he had been childhood friends, that was all. When did you see me? 2 years later. How? By chance. It was late at night, on a passenger platform of the Taggart terminal. She knew that this was a form of surrender. He did not want to say it, yet he had to speak. She heard both the muted intensity and the pull of resistance in his voice. He had to speak, because he had to give himself and her this one form of contact. You wore an evening gown. You had a cape half slipping off your body. I saw at first only your bare shoulders, your back, and your profile. It looked for a moment as if the cape would slip further and you would stand there naked. Then I saw that you wore a long gown, the color of ice, like the tunic of a Grecian goddess. But you had the short hair and the imperious profile of an American woman. You looked preposterously out of place on a railroad platform. And it was not on a railroad platform that I was seeing you. I was seeing a setting that had never haunted me before. But then suddenly I knew that you did belong, among the rails, the soot, and the girders, that was the proper setting for a flowing gown and naked shoulders and a face as alive as yours. A railroad platform, not a curtained apartment. You looked like a symbol of luxury, and you belonged in the place that was its source. You seemed to bring wealth, grace, extravagance, and the enjoyment of life back to their rightful owners, to the men who created railroads and factories. You had a look of energy and of its reward, together, a look of competence and luxury combined. And I was the first man who had ever stated in what manner these two were inseparable. And I thought that if our age gave form to its proper gods and erected a statue to the meaning of an American railroad, yours would be that statue. Then I saw what you were doing, and I knew who you were. You were giving orders to 3 terminal officials. I could not hear your words, but your voice sounded swift, clear-cut, and confident. I knew that you were Dagny Taggart. I came closer, close enough to hear 2 sentences. Who said so? Asked one of the men. I did, you answered. That was all I heard, and that was enough. And then? He raised his eyes slowly to hold hers across the room, and the submerged intensity that pulled his voice down, blurring its tone to softness, gave it a sound of self-mockery that was desperate and almost gentle. Then I knew that abandoning my motor was not the hardest price I would have to pay for this strike. She wondered which anonymous shadow among the passengers who had hurried past her, as insubstantial as the steam of the engines and as ignored, which shadow and face had been his. She wondered how close she had come to him for the length of that unknown moment. Oh, why didn't you speak to me then or later? Do you happen to remember what you were doing in the terminal that night? I remember vaguely a night when they called me from some party I was attending. My father was out of town, and the new terminal manager had made some sort of error that tied up all traffic in the tunnels. The old manager had quit unexpectedly the week before. It was I who made him quit. I see. Her voice trailed off, as if abandoning sound, as her eyelids dropped, abandoning sight. If he had not withstood it then, she thought, if he had come to claim her, then or later, what sort of tragedy would they have had to reach? She remembered what she had felt when she had cried that she would shoot the destroyer on sight. I would have. The thought was not in words. She knew it only as a trembling pressure in her stomach. I would have shot him afterward if I discovered his role. And I would have had to discover it. And yet, she shuddered because she knew she still wished he had come to her. because the thought not to be admitted into her mind, but flowing as a dark warmth through her body, was, I would have shot him, but not before.